proceed. The February 25th regular meeting of the Sewer Authority Midcoastside Board of Directors is called to order. Roll call, please.
Director Patridge?
Here.
Director Alfano?
Here.
Chair Warren?
Present.
Vice Chair Harvey?
Here.
Director Boyd?
Here.
Director Lohman?
Here.
Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2, comment oral communication. Any comments from members of the public or from directors on items not on the agenda? Seeing none. Item 3, I don't think we have any paid by the hour contractors here for closed session. So,
Well, I was going to suggest we move to the, where you going? Okay. Suggest we move to the back of the
so
meeting.
since there are no paid by the hour contractors here for closed session, let's move the consent agenda to the end of the meeting. I mean, not the consent, the closed session. Looking too far ahead here. Any objections to moving the closed session to the end of the meeting?
No.
All right, we'll do that. So, item 4, consent agenda.
I just have a question to ask on the minutes.
I have marked to hold the minutes for discussion.
Oh, no, I just want to ask a question.
Well, I want to hold them for discussion.
Oh, okay.
You want to pull them?
Yes.
Okay. So it's pulled, all right. Then I'll ask my question then.
Now, I actually have a question on one of the things on the check detail. Just a curiosity question, so I don't know if we want to hold it for discussion or if I should just ask the question. Does anybody else want to hold anything off of consent for discussion?
Let's talk about the disbursements.
So do you want to hold that then for consent? So what's left then is item B. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda item B, the manager's
So moved.
monthly report? Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, item A, which is the minutes. Find that here. On the third sheet, which is page 2 of the January 28th minutes, it's actually the discussion of approving the December 10th minutes, where Director Kowalczyk brought up that he didn't think that the Half Moon Bay representative's vote was based on accurate information. But I suggested, and he agreed, that that wouldn't be a change to the minutes, because the minutes have to reflect what actually happened at the meeting, but that we could just put a note for the record in the January 28th minutes reflecting his concerns. That's what we agreed to, so we didn't in fact alter the minutes for December 10th. So that means the January 28th minutes need that part taken out of item A and basically just I don't quite know where you would put that. Maybe council can give you an idea of how to include that for the record.
We should come out of the correction and just have a statement of fact in this meeting, January meeting, to the effect of
Something like that, yeah. I think I had one other thing here. On page 3 of January 28th, it says Director Boyd gave direction to staff. That's a little iffy. One director can't really give direction to staff, but it was agreed by the directors of the participating agencies. So how do we wanna word that?
Directors gave.
Director Boyd suggested, and the other directors agreed. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay. Then on the special meeting, the February 11th minutes, on one of the votes, there was an abstention under old business. So, and I've made this request before, that any time the vote is not unanimous, the names of the directors who didn't vote yes should always be indicated. Because we don't do roll call votes, so it at least needs to be shown in the minutes. So that's all I have on the minutes. Anyone have anything else on the minutes?
I just had a general question. I noticed in the minutes when I was reading them tonight, and I know I probably didn't pick it up before, but in your minutes, you don't have like the chair or vice chair in the minutes, you just put director regardless if they're chair or vice chair? That's just a question.
You mean
In the minutes,
individual-
right, where it says Director Kowalczyk instead of chair, or when you spoke, it wasn't vice chair, or whoever's vice chair, Jim or whatever. So, oh, that's right, Rick's not chair no more.
I think it's in there now.
Was it?
I think we try to do that, but
So is
We
Rick
missed
just a
one?
director now?
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, okay. See, I haven't
He's
been here,
hardly
that's why.
just a director.
Well, I mean, he's not chair, okay, sorry. Sorry, Leonard.
According to one of the directors at the last meeting, he's a dashing mayor, quite
Oh.
handsome. Or was that the former mayor? How did
He
that?
couldn't do more than two things at once. We'll just go with mayor for now.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Just, I mean, on that, I see you're in here several times as general manager Leonard. So that's,
That's
Leonard,
Steve.
so.
Yeah.
Just having fun, I'm sorry.
Second.
It's difficult when I call them and say, hi Leonard, this is Leonard,
We had
You
two
know,
weeks going through.
We used to have a SAM director named Sam.
Well, that's
And that was good for a lot of confusion. Was there a second?
Naomi
Mike,
seconded.
second.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, motion carries unanimously. And then what was the,
Disbursements.
warrants.
Warren, I had a couple of questions. One, I noticed we're paying Half Bay Alarm, and I don't know, I can't tell, is it $135 a month?
That's quarterly.
That's quarterly, okay,
I believe that is that for fire?
Yes.
that's for fire alarm,
It's a fire,
okay. And then we
Yeah,
pay,
that's
Hue-
quarterly,
then we pay Hue and Cry,
yes, that's monthly.
why are they separate? They,
Half Bay used to cover all of our alarms, the fire alarm and our alarms for the plant pump stations. Their equipment got outdated and they quit updating their equipment, it would break. So we had to change companies. The fire alarm equipment is our own and it just reports to their system, so that's fine. And I think it's less money than Hue and Cry would charge, so we stayed with them.
119, but again, I can't tell if it's monthly or quarterly.
The fire
You
alarm
would
is
try
quarterly.
as monthly.
Monthly, okay. I would just make a suggestion, because we had the same thing at work. We had Half Bay Alarm and we had some issues, because same kind of thing, they weren't keeping up with their equipment and so forth. And we had a couple of bids, you know, ADT and, I think it was Bay Alarm, and another one. And we finally settled on Bay Alarm. And we saved money, and they seem to be doing a very good job. So it might be something you might occasionally want to just ask for some other companies to bid on it. It's not a huge amount, but it's worth looking at. And the other one was, I can't find it again, there was some kind of a union meeting in here or something, or some training.
I saw that Padilla. Wasn't it Danny
Safety
Padilla?
training?
Said Padilla.
David.
Tim
That's
Costello,
you.
is it the CWEA training?
I think Tortilla had something, David.
Yeah, are you thinking of CWVA?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm questioning, you know, I don't know, is this a once a month thing, once a quarter?
That's for him to take his operator certification test for his grade.
Well, is that for Tim?
No,
No,
that's
that's
for
David.
David
That was for
Partita.
David.
David
David.
Partita?
Is that what we're
So
talking
you
about?
got Tim, Tim Castillo.
I guess I was looking at the one CWEA
Okay.
That's Tim
70, 70, and
Costello.
35.
Yeah, Zabo and Sandoval.
Okay.
Each month, the CWA puts on a training
Yeah.
meeting, and Tim usually, he's a member of the CDA, he's in the organization, so he fronts the money and then we pay him back. About $35 per person that goes.
And so how many people do we send?
There was
Um,
three.
it-
5 to that one.
you know,
5?
It changes monthly.
I mean, this is the kind of thing where one or two people could attend and they could bring back the training and show the other people. I'm just curious.
I think we've had this discussion before, it's a networking opportunity for not just, you know, a couple of people, it's a networking opportunity for a broad array of folks. It's been, you know, it's a way to get them in touch with other operators. In fact, Suzie goes to it as a way to get in touch with other folks in other offices, so if we need to check things out, they've got, they know people in other areas.
Where do they hold these at?
Various places, various restaurants.
They move around?
Yeah.
They come to the coast once a quarter. They come here pretty often, I'm surprised. They're here quite a bit.
All right. Those are the only questions I had.
Oh, I did have a curiosity question on one of them, I don't know if I flagged it though. The light item for rebuild bleach pump heads, that attracted my attention, it's a big ticket item, so what did that actually, that's, Burlingame Engineers, but what was that?
That was for 2 pumps, and there are disinfection pumps, they feed the disinfecting chemicals into the waste stream. And unfortunately, there's only one vendor for that.
But that's to engineers though, so
Well,
that's not
they
even.
call themselves engineers, but
Oh, so they actually did the work?
they did the work for us,
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
Most of that cost was parts though. Amazing how much those cost.
Anything else on the disbursements or a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Item 5, old business. Reconsideration of SAM flow metering for budget allocation purposes.
Following up on Director Kwalchek's concern about this item from the December meeting, I've put together the data, come back to the board to go through it in whatever level of detail the board be interested in. We have data here to look at a 1-year average. The 1 year would be the calendar year 2012. Look at a 3-year average, which would be the calendar years 2010 through 2012. In the back, I've taken the proposed assessments for next year. Granted, it hasn't been approved, but just for the information value of what the costs might be if the current budget was adopted under either of these two proposals. And then finally, I put in a 5-year, previous 5-year look at the distribution, so that people can get a historical view to put last year's numbers in context. So I want to bring it back and have the discussion. The last time this was brought, the board approved a number of things, a number of staff recommendations. This was adopting a 1-year, return to a 1-year allocation average was embedded in with 3 other things, pulling it out so the board can reconsider and look at that issue again.
You know, I wasn't here in December, And when I left, because we had this big discussion with the previous budget, I think we were gonna use a 1 year, and it had a very significant impact on, I guess, Granada. And we went back and forth, and I suggested, okay, and a neighborly gesture, we would go, I suggested a 3 year. And then I thought, and we finally agreed on that. And then I thought when we left that subject, I think we all agreed we were gonna go on a 3 year rolling average, so that as time went on, assuming we get fixed all our flow problems, it should level out the impact to all the districts. I mean, I thought that's the way we left it. Then I come back and it looks like we're looking to go to a 1 year, and there's a huge impact to our agency, almost close to $90,000. And it just, I thought this is what we were trying to get away from. I mean, I'm fine if at some point we could move slowly into the 1 year, it would probably make some sense. But it just seemed like this is the opposite of what we were trying to accomplish. Maybe I missed something when I left.
Rick?
Well, the reason we went to 3 year, and I think we started with a 5 year and ended up at a 3 year because we had the 2 year hump where we took off. And then we immediately, once they fixed the pumps, dropped down to where we were. So underneath that hump, you know, it's not that you're being charged huge amounts now. You folks saved a bunch of money over those years, those 2 years. So what would happen in averaging, if we continued the averaging now, we would still have that big hump as part of the average for 2 more years. And I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars Granada paid during that hump, but.
Yeah, the overpayment is something like 90 or 100 or 150,000.
90 or 100,000, let's just call it 100,000 for now. It's not totally relevant, but let's say it's about $100,000 we paid extra. We decided not to pursue that, and we just said we're just gonna stop and we're just gonna move forward in time. The assumption with that was we would quit doing the averaging because the averaging keeps that hump going for 2 more years, and we'd end up probably spending $30,000 or $40,000 more dollars you know, with that hump, because you just keep pulling in those 2 bad years year after year. So we agreed to not pursue it anymore and basically eat the $100,000. The assumption was we would go back, now that the rates are stable the way they used to be before the 2 year hump, that we wouldn't continue to drag those years in, and basically you folks benefited, you know, roughly the $100,000. We wanted to cut it off at $100,000 and just not keep paying more addition above the historical rates, which we're back to now. So I think, I'm not sure if you missed that meeting during that time, but that was the logic behind it was.
In December?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I was going on.
Okay, so we decided that we'll eat the 100,000, but, you know, we don't wanna continue to eat even more. Now, the way they present it here, it looks like you're being hit. So why would you want to be hit again? But really what it is we're just going back to what the rates would have been. So you folks saved, the savings you had were for the prior 2 years. And we're just trying to say, well, let's go back to what the normal rates are. So the way they presented it, yes, you would be paying more into that, but this puts you back to your historical payment average the way it was. So we just wanted to quit paying even more, now they got the meters fixed again. And we said we'll eat that 100,000, but we just can't eat anymore, because if you look at the charts anybody's presented, there's that huge hump during the 2 years where they were playing with meters. And as soon as they recalibrated them all, boom, we're back to normal, so.
Which 2 years are we talking about?
I think it's 20.
11, 12,
I think-
or 10, 11?
I think it's 2010 and 2011.
11, 12 was the worst of the years.
11,
I
12.
think it was fixed in 12.
There's a different way to approach this, but Sam's staff has declined to consider it, and that is to go back and correct the 2 years' worth of incorrect readings for GSD and redo the billing, but Sam's staff won't do that. And You know, if you wanna go to 3-year averaging, then we have to go back and correct the readings for 2 years.
Well, I think part of the problem is we don't really 100% know exactly what was wrong or what was right 3, 4, 5 years ago. My understanding is we're getting it, or it's gotten fixed. It just seemed to me like, we changed from what I thought we'd agreed to was to stay with this rolling 3-year average, which would gradually level things out. I mean, I'd even be willing to consider a 2-year average to try and move away from this, but not have the hit, you know, quite so significant. Because past history, 5 years ago, I can't really talk to. But at that last budget meeting, I guess it was a year ago, I mean, that was the intent to say, hey, let's go to the 3-year, with kind of a compromise from the 5-year. And it really kind of began to level things out for all 3 agencies. I just thought it was a kind of somewhat drastic step to go from 3 to 1, and then have us jump up another close to 90,000. So I'd be willing to consider a 2-year average, which looks like it's still an increase, but it's not as significant of an increase as it would have been.
And Leonard, the reason we went to the averaging was we were on the climb. We were going up, and the reason we did the 3 years is that pulled some of the normal years into the bad years to soften the overpayment we were making. So that's why we went to the 3, but once they fixed the problem, you know, we wanted to stop doing the averaging at that point. That's why we had that discussion in December.
We also need.
Because we dropped back down, and we said we'll take the $100,000 hit.
Well, let's also point out that we never actually did the 3-year average. The 3-year average was proposed for the upcoming budget year.
Right, but we did it for the previous budget.
No.
We've never done multi-year averaging. Never been done.
The previous budget, correct me if I'm wrong, we did a 3-year average.
This budget year is a 3-year average.
Yeah, it
The
is.
one we're in right now?
Yes,
Yes.
that was a compromise.
I don't remember that.
You were all wanted 5, right? We were like back and
This
forth.
year, or what? When you say
12,
this is,
13, the existing budget.
So the
This
12,
current- this
13.
current fiscal year.
Right, we're talking about this for 13, 14.
Time flies.
so I don't
the-
see the relevance of that.
The fundamental thing is that there was a pretty tremendous error going on in the metering. Granada brought this up quite a while back. We all worked to try to understand what was going on. Sam's staff got on it, and it took a while, but we now understand where the errors were. I don't think there's any question at this point that we know where the errors were. Well, you shrugged. We've sat through a few, well, you shrugged, and.
No, when I came here, let's face it, every month, when I first came, hang on, Nick, when I came here.
Excuse me,
Alan, can
seriously?
we keep order here,
Yeah.
please? Director Boyd has the floor.
Go ahead, Scott.
We sat through a couple of really good detailed presentations talking about what the errors were, that they found them, they measured them, they fixed them, they measured those and kept an eye on them. And we got to the point where we were convinced that they'd actually gotten on top of this thing. So to continue billing in a way that uses what we know to have been erroneous readings would be to continue that error. Why would we do that?
Where do they get fixed? What point?
We stopped using the influent meter in favor of the midnight.
So
When?
what was the date?
We brought the item, there were a number of fixes over time. We brought the item to adopt Sam's flow measurement in December. That's when we rolled there were 5 items on the agenda that we rolled up. The one we didn't get rolled up was Frenchman's Creek. That's still out there with no solution to that at this point. But going to the mid-plant meter, using a positive measurement of Half Moon Bay flows. What else we have in here? Continue calibrating the partial flume on positive signals rather than, what do you call those? Analog, yeah, using digital signals, not analog signals. And yeah, adjusting to the mid-plant meter, which we checked against our other metering sources. And this was all rolled up into this item on December 10th.
I have a question to ask. If you indeed have been going back, and I haven't been coming to the meetings, I'm just asking this question. Wouldn't the flows show that increase to Half Moon Bay and a decrease to El Granada? Has it been showing that in the last 6 months? If it
Yes.
hasn't, then,
Yes.
wait. So I'm asking Steve, if it hasn't shown, then why is it all of a sudden showing and the budget is being hit? So, I mean, if it was clearly showing, then, there was no indication in the flow meters that this was this drastic,
I'm not
is what I'm
quite
saying.
sure what you're
Well,
asking.
because you're saying that we're increasing for the treatment is 50, and we were at 46.6, and then you were at 32, and you're down to 28. Those figures should have been coinciding all along on the flow meters, because this is all by flow meter, right?
Right.
Well,
Right.
Half Moon Bay and Granada are kind of.
It should be, there should not be
No,
no,
but
but it does
they're
flux
done,
up
well,
and
they're done
down.
with subtractions, so against a total. So you take the total, you subtract Granada off of it, and Half Moon Bay gets billed for the rest, because Half Moon Bay wasn't on meters for, over this whole stretch. Now there's some meters where we can kind of see if that math is looking more right. That actually contributed to helping solve this problem, is understanding that. So the historical has been, it's always been very close to 50, 30, 20. It's always been very, very close to that. And where Granada started raising the issue was when it deviated and Half Moon Bay started down towards 40. And we're like, okay, we'd like to understand that. We knew that you guys have been doing some sewer work, and so, who knows, maybe it's a conservation effort, maybe it's a number of other things. We explored all of that and came up pretty much empty, and in the end, it was bad meters.
You know something, the whole time that I was on the sewer board, Half Moon Bay was never at 50. It was never at 50.
It was never below 48.5 though.
Wow.
And there's
But
one.
I'm saying it was never at 50, and here it's saying 50. So that's what I'm disputing, because for all the time that I sat on this board, we were never at 50. And then all of a sudden, we're 46 up to 50. That's a big jump, and then you guys went down a big jump. So I haven't been here, so I'm questioning it. Because if I would have seen the meters, the flow all this time, it would have been different. Then on the historical flow meters on page 4, the years 2010-11 is 99.9, 11 and 11-12 is 95.2 for the totals. So they're not; those 2 years aren't totaling 100. So
How does that work?
I didn't follow where
on
are you?
page 4 in the historic flow chart, they don't add up. They don't add up to 100.
Are you looking at
The bottom.
Bottom
The
right
bottom.
corner.
So you're looking at this little section here?
Yes, exactly.
I didn't even try and add those.
Well, let me tell you what they are. 100, 99.9, fine. 95.2,
Wait a second, 100,
100, 100, 99.9, 95.2, 100. So my guess is the 2011-12 have got a math error, I'm guessing.
Somewhere there's a math error.
I'll have to look at this, there's another column out further, which is other, and I don't know what that is, but you're right, that should total awful close to 100.
Yeah.
But, Naomi, if you look at 2007-8 and 2008-9 and 2009-10, all of those are Half Moon Bay over 50%. So things have changed somewhat in the, how many years has it been since you were on this board? I don't remember.
I just been alternate.
But,
about
you know,
5,
things
6
have
years.
changed, and, we
Yeah.
see 3 here, and that's, before the meters went south, probably before the meters went south, although if you look in the, you look through the minutes, you'll find that I was raising the issue in 2009, that something didn't look right, even back that far.
Well, no, I'm not questioning that, I'm just questioning.
No, we looked at, do you remember the meeting where we had, we had like the 10-year numbers?
Yes.
Do you remember which meeting that was? I'm just digging through the
Late-
agendas
I mean,
online.
mid 2000, early 2011, I think. And we went back and did 10 years of data. One thing, directors, if you take a look at, we do have the specific data for 11, 12 in these larger pages. If there is an error there, but it's pretty clear, Granada throughout 11, 12 is in excess of 30% at all but one of the points in that thing. So this number here of 28% is probably low for Granada.
Yeah.
And Half Moon Bay, it looks like it's about right for Half Moon Bay in the sense that Half Moon Bay is running between 44 and 46 in that period of time, but Granada's running at 35 to 30 in that period of time.
Let's be careful, you can't average averages.
No, these aren't averages, these are percentages, but if you look at the percent of.
But, well, the percentages are still averages across the whole
I
month.
understand, Director, but in terms of looking, if all the values are 30% and above, and the roll-up of it comes out to 28%, that's the problem. There's a roll-up problem there.
Well, looking at the chart, and I hadn't looked at every number in here before, but toward the bottom of page 3, where we see a few months of GSD in the low and mid-20s, yeah, that doesn't look right. So it looks like we still have a problem here.
But, again, let me get back to my
Well, we
original.
should always feel free to examine any month's flow and raise the issues. I mean, we should
Yeah.
always do that.
But we're trying to come up with a budget number going forward for 13, 14. So last time, like I said, you all wanted a 5-year, we wanted a 1-year, and we offered the compromise of a 3-year. So I'm simply suggesting to move forward to get through this impasse, let's go with, say, a 2-year, which is 24 months of data. Again, there's some imperfect math going on in here, whether it's, what factors, I don't know. And then maybe for 14, 15, we could settle on a 1-year, if we can see that the data is really starting to settle down. We try to help you all absorb some of the hit with the 3-year. I'm saying, why not go the same way and do a 2-year with us for this next budget?
Just a point of order, if you could note for the minutes, or presto chango on.
Yeah, the minutes reflect that,
Where did Naomi go?
We did a high five and
So who gets the check for this month?
They split it.
I buy Naomi a beer. So.
the minutes need to reflect that at 7:37, Director Qualcheck arrived and the
Naomi disappeared.
alternate director, Patridge, left the meeting.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Happily. Anyhow, that's my suggestion, is we've gone to 3, let's consider a 2 for the upcoming budget, and then I'd be very open to looking for, if the data is now getting more consistent, we could go for the 1-year for the 14-15 budget.
But the reason that Granada has an issue with the averaging is because we were overcharged for at least 2 years, and if we do the averaging, that compounds the overcharging.
In the long run, it works out.
Yeah, 3 years from now, we'll be back to normal.
No,
we'll
it
be
doesn't,
fine.
it still doesn't wash.
All I'm saying, 3
Oh,
years.
because there was never a correction made.
Right.
For that to really work, you have to make the
If
correction.
we go back and do the correction for at least the 2 years where it's really, really clear.
I think we
that
should
the
go back and do
meters
the
were off,
correction. I've thought that all along.
Well, I didn't get support when I wanted to direct the manager to do that. There was insufficient support at the SAM board, so that didn't happen. Now, if we wanna revisit that, I'm willing to do the 3-year average if the 2 very clear years of overcharging Granada are corrected. Director Qualcheck.
I know I'm the new guy here tonight, but when we went to the 3-year average, we had a discussion around why that's smart to do. And the key selling point, I thought, and definitely for me, was that it blends the impact of any spikes. That was very compelling. I said, you know what, that's the reason to support that, using a 3-year average. It also, I think there was a case to be made that it lowered the rates, it raised our rates a little bit, lowered the rates of other agencies, and that was also a fine point. Is it now the contention that we don't need to do that anymore? I think that was still smart to do, right?
Can I have
Director Harvey.
That's my only point.
I thought that we got a lot of information about how the meters were working correctly now, and the averages or the totals are correct. And I thought that we saw those presentations that the meters are now working correctly and that this data is correct. So I'm not sure why we're talking about averaging at all if this data is believable. I thought that was, we got the information on the meters. We were shown in great detail how the correction, how the error was made and how the corrections are now in place. So this data now is correct. So why are we talking about averaging at all? We're just going forward with the rates that we have, and those are the rates that we use for these. What the data we get is what we'll use for 2013.
Oh, the reason for averaging is to smooth out wild swings and avoid member agencies from taking big hits
Right,
suddenly.
the one year average, yes.
But yeah, in this particular case, as I've said, I don't know any different way to say it. It compounds the hit against Granada for the 2 years where the meters were wildly off. And if we want to maintain the 3-year average, then that has to be fixed. We have to go back and do the correction for the 2 years where Granada was grossly overcharged.
I just don't know that I've ever heard of a situation where you go back and change a previous budget. I mean,
Oh, sure you do.
what basically,
When there's error in a business relationship, and things have been misallocated, it happens all the time.
I guess if we could agree that there was errors that we could agree upon, I mean, the
Well, I
problem,
think we know there were errors. The question might be about the amount.
exactly. I mean,
I think the size of the amount that you're concerned about this year should give some indication as to the size of the error that we might have been looking at. So I would suggest we could either go reopen that, or we could move forward with what we voted 8-0 unanimously in December on. The issue that Director Kowalczyk raised had to do with a statement made by the manager based on clearly a misunderstanding. And I appreciate that meant you might have been making a decision, you wanted some clearer information to work from on that. That, I think, is fine, but in terms of where we are with the money, the amount this year does suggest something about not just one prior year, but maybe 2?
but
Which way do you wanna go?
assuming that you could concretely show the errors through some kind of evidence. That's the problem to me is,
Well,
when you start going back 3, 4, 5 years, and that was the issue I had when I first came here, that's all you guys talked about was the flows and how screwed up they were.
Yeah,
And finally,
and we were right.
yeah, I guess, I mean, I couldn't believe how long that had gone on. And if I remember the statement was, Rick said during the budget meeting, you guys forced us into a 1-year flow under protest. I'm like, okay, this is history. And then as we went back and forth, you all wanted 5-year, we were saying, hey, let's do the most current year. We compromised on 3, am I right? Current year, we compromised on 3. And I thought going forward, we were gonna use a 3-year rolling average, which would eventually smooth things out. And if the flows are correct, any 3 years are gonna be correct. So all I'm saying is, in the meantime, to try and move forward, and again, in that same spirit, let's go to a 2-year average, move to 1 year next year. Now, if somebody has concrete evidence from a past flow meter that they can have show something, that's one thing, but just to look at the numbers and say, oh, see, the numbers were off.
Well, as an offer of concrete evidence, two things actually. One is I went out and watched the bucket test where they filled up one of the tanks here, what's that, 200,000 gallons? Although I think you only filled it to like 120 or something.
About that.
And you know, there's Tony with a tape measure measuring the level and computing the dimensions of the tank and converting that to gallons, and then checking with the reading for what was registered on the metering equipment, and they were not in the same country.
So that's, if I may, that's
And
evidence
so
that it's wrong,
well,
right?
wait, that's the first half of the evidence that I'm offering. The second half is that once all the meters were corrected, all of a sudden, like throwing a switch, the flows dramatically changed from 1 month to the next, once the meters were corrected.
Leonard, that is what got you looking at this in the first place. That was unprecedented.
When it,
This is the flow in late 2008. Granada had never had higher flow than Half Moon Bay, but that's what that's showing. And Leonard was right to go, whoa, that can't be right. And then the subsequent years, you see a pattern that is quite substantially different, and no agency can show any kind of material change in the operation or the structure or the failure rate or any other material thing that would contribute to drastically different flows. We entertained lots of theories about them. We entertained higher water table, you know, we entertained bad pumps, bad meters, all sorts of things. Fact of the matter is, fixed it, and bam, right back to the normal pattern. So, I mean, we can talk about there's no reasonable or equitable standard by which we could judge this, but frankly, it would be a lot more compelling argument if it was coming from someone who wasn't financially interested in the outcome of this, right?
Yeah, and so I tell you.
So I offer by way of, these guys have decided to let bygones be bygones. I figure it's way north of $100,000 based on how far back this went.
Okay, so but the
And-
point is
and-
that
and-
then
and-
all the averaging was just BS. That was just BS.
No,
So- yeah,
no,
it's BS.
no.
I can deal with it, but it's BS.
No, I don't think so. It's that for it not to be BS, when errors are discovered, we have to adjust for the errors and include that in the calculation of the averages, because you can't average out the error. Okay, what that was doing was averaging out the rate shock. That it would have done.
No, what that
But-
was
but
doing,
when we determined-
what that was doing was allowing us to move to a lower number, which I totally get. But using the argument was successful and allowed us to move to a lower number
No,
last year. And the attempt is to move to a lower number this year, throwing out the 3-year average as a concept. We don't even need to argue, I don't even care. We don't even need to argue about it.
No,
That's what I believe.
I'm going to be clear on this point.
Okay, but
It averages out the rate shock. It does not.
understand.
It does not average out
And
or
what we're
correct.
saying now is averaging out the rate shock doesn't
I'm gonna
matter.
finish my point.
Okay.
It averages out the rate shock. It does not correct or average out the error.
Mm-hmm.
So for us to go forward with a moving average like that, we need to add back in the correction for the error. So if we're going to do that, I'm going to insist that we correct the error. Granada is offering to not need to do that, but only if we go forward with correct measurements for billing from here on out.
I understand your
I'm
point.
gonna suggest one's gonna be economically more advantageous than the other.
I understand your point. I'm sorry, Rick, I keep interrupting you, but.
No, it's okay. I want to say, and you kind of alluded to part of the answer there too, Rick, was when we offered the 3-year, or we went 5 and compromised on 3-year average, we didn't have the solution then. So a 3-year compromise obviously limited the initial damage of the problem. We're all saying that. It could have been, instead of only paying $100,000, it could have been $200,000. We could have been nailed, but by compromise, we only got nailed for a little over $100,000 or something like that. So I mean, in a steady state, the averaging is nice because it takes some tiny fluctuations out, but the practical method of that 3-year average was to stop killing to kill El Granada less while we were being killed. Okay, right after we agreed upon that and got it in, the problem was solved. So we found the problem, the rates immediately dropped back, and I don't know what other kind of evidence you could come up with other than they went in and replaced the meters and fixed them, identified the problem, and bing, the problem went away. That to me looks like an answer. So what we obviously don't want to do, and that's what we voted on in December, was to not take 2 more years of averaging and do 2 more stabs in El Granada's back, you know, just because that's what the numbers were. And, you know, I understand the way it was presented, it looks like you're losing money by doing this, but you're not losing money. We're just dropping back down to the normal rates again. This is where if we had not had the humps, this is exactly where we would have been, except you would have had to pay another $100,000 earlier. So what we're just asking is to not continue the errors, because I think it's obvious what the problem was. So you're not losing money, because now we're just back to normal, and actually you gained over $100,000. So that's our argument. So, and I agree with Scott, if we can't do that, then we somehow have to go back and change it, because I don't understand the logic of just saying because of this error, we can all just keep sticking it to El Granada. Because we're the smallest of the groups, and a $100,000 hit was pretty bad.
Halfmoon's argument,
For the smallest.
Halfmoon's argument would make sense if one condition had existed that didn't, and that was if we'd been doing 3-year averaging all along. But we weren't, and so for the 2 years where the meters were out of whack, and in the second year of those 2 years, it was really, really out of whack, as you saw in the graph that Scott just held up.
That was end of '08. It wasn't just 2 years.
Okay, so apparently the problem was going on for a lot longer than A, we realized, and B, I'm remembering right now. And so Granada was taking a hit for a long time, and we weren't doing multi-year averaging all that time. And so to do the multi-year averaging now, when it only benefits the one agency that has already benefited from the metering problem, just seems wrong to us.
You know, based on the math I see with the flows and all the meter issues I've heard about over the last, over a year, I've just had a really hard time accepting any of this stuff as gospel. And I think you all realized several years ago there were issues. And you never knew, correct me if I'm wrong, you really never knew what was accurate and what wasn't. So to get over that, instead of a 5-year average of what you all were wanting to do, we said, all right, let's just go with 3. And there was no science to that in my mind. It was simply to try and smooth the hits out to the various agencies. And then I thought we had agreed moving forward, we're gonna continue that type of average till we got a consistent, we had the flows corrected and the flows were showing some consistency. I'm just kinda shocked that we suddenly changed from that agreement we had, and now suddenly we're at the 1 year. Because during that conversation in the previous budget meeting, it wasn't about trying to go back. It was simply to get something that reduced the hit to you all, just based on math, looking at 5 years flows, 3 years flows, and 1 year, it reduced the hit. I'm of the same opinion right now. I don't really know what's right or wrong with the partial, flumy, and the rest of this stuff. I simply know that the flows have been a little crazy. If you look at the numbers, there's a lack of total consistency. So my feeling was, gee, we did 3 years last year, okay, let's just take it down to 2, minimize the hit a little, and then take it down to 1, then hopefully we're normal. That's my feeling. I mean, we did that as an offering, what do you wanna call it, a peace offering last time. It smooths things out.
How much would that save you this year?
This year it's 80, well, if we do a 3-year versus a 1, it's 88. I'm not sure what, I think a 2-year is less, but Steve didn't put a 2-year in here.
So, hang on.
I want.
Do you have the votes to get this tonight?
So, wait, before we go there, let me toss out another way to look at this. You're saying that your agreement to go back to 1-year averaging was based on incorrect information. Our request to go to 3-year averaging was based on incorrect information.
Yes.
We would not have made that request if we'd had proper metering.
Agreed.
So I think, if I may, through the chair, Scott, you make a point, is you have the votes. No, I think we're gonna keep using all of our sound logic will keep bouncing off of each other to perpetuity, right? Because I don't think there's a votes here to change this. Alan, if I could be bold, I know, Alan and I talked to, we're gonna ask your support on another item tonight. And, Alan, I think I'd like to offer, find a compromise in that, let's we'll go to the 1 year, and then we ask for support on the other item tonight. I don't know if we can tie them together, I don't know how that works, but maybe we pause on
We're
this. and-
not gonna time together.
Well,
I don't know, I don't even know which item you're talking about, but what we're talking about here is there was error. We were sure of it. We didn't know what the cause of it was. We spent 2 or 3 years figuring it out. Staff got it done. It was a tough one. And I commend staff for sticking with it through all of the theories and all of the evaluating equipment and looking back at the historical record and digging through and presenting multiple times to the board what you knew and the state of the investigation. And we are convinced that the error has been found. I'm convinced that error will happen again because it's a bunch of equipment that we have to pay to maintain and operate. And error will come up. We're gonna want some kind of procedure that works for us when and if error presents itself again. However, at this point, what we see is, like Leonard said, it was like somebody threw a light switch and bam, we're back on track with the historical record that we've known for quite a long time.
So,
And
but Ms. Scott, I'm just,
so
I'm
just-
just doing
just
just
give
trying
it-
to help us move along.
I am too, and we are at times gonna simply remain at odds on certain things, but I don't think we're interested in propagating that error any further. Granada has already,
You misunderstood me. I was going for 1 year.
Granada has already compromised mightily by saying they're not gonna press the issue on looking back to correct the error in the.
Well, perhaps you didn't understand me. I made a suggestion that we talk about something that or I said we would support a 1 year,
I see,
right?
I did misunderstand your point. Okay,
So,
I understand now, thank you.
So, I'm like,
I'll-
why is he
I'll
arguing
stop.
with me?
I'll stop.
Because I misunderstood.
The one thing
Gotcha.
I would suggest though is that if we look near the bottom of page 2, it does look like there's 4 months there where GSD's flows are lower than I'd expect. So if the staff could review whatever data you have there and see if those are really correct, because there's the corresponding, the Half Moon Bay flows for those same 4 months are rather higher than I'd expect to see. They're 54 and 55% when I'd expect to see 50 and 51.
Mr. Chair, we will do that for you. We'll take a look at that, but looking back over the historic record, there is one interesting anomaly that shows up in 3 out of 4 years, is that it looks like summer in Half Moon Bay, that the flows where other agencies are hitting minimum flows in July, you're seeing Half Moon Bay flows rise into September, October, and we just assume that's summer in Half Moon Bay when you get people coming and staying. But it goes back to 2002, and at 2 out of 3 years, you'll see this rise through that period. But we'll take a look at that and answer your question.
All right, I'd like you to ask you to do something which I'm assuming that an Excel expert can do if you could find 10 different colors of the copy or print. If you could And I think I've made this request before, but I don't remember, maybe we already received it, and you can just dig it up and redistribute it. If you could do a, you know, say January to December grid and put 10 lines on it for,
10 years?
The problem is you might need 30 lines, because you have 3-member agencies. You might have to present three different charts, one for each agency, I think, you know, each one with 10 lines on it. So do you understand what I'm suggesting?
10 years of history on the flows?
But on a single page overlaid, so, you know, one page for Half Moon Bay, one page for Granada, one page for.
I know we've certainly done a year at a time, we could probably do it.
But I wanna see the overlays, and, you know, not flow amounts, but flow percentages, so that we can see, you know, at a really easy glance, how each member agency's flows trend over the time. And I think that would be potentially illuminating. But it sounds like we're kinda okay right now, so should we move to the next agenda item?
So I'm gonna suggest that we move to the next agenda item, and then I think we can quickly resolve, this item.
Sorry, I stepped out for a second. Did we vote, or did we, what
No.
was
I
the?
think what Rick suggested, let's move on to item 6A, and let's see if we can get through that, and we can go back to 5A.
So there's no
Why would we come back?
actual, there's no actual action shown for 5A.
This is true. So doing nothing leaves it leaves it at one.
Alright.
Okay.
What I was suggesting, I think Scott misunderstood me, is that, that we'll sort of
It's already set up as a one-year.
find, but and we'll look for some support on the next item.
Okay, but let's be careful, because, and I don't know the code section, but I did stumble over, you know, a few years ago, a code section that actually says vote trading is illegal. So,
Not vote trading.
That's not what he's suggesting. He's suggesting we move on and consider something where we might find an accord,
right,
right?
okay,
Yeah.
so, new business, item 6A, authorize general manager to issue RFP for financial services.
Director, let me, I've supplemented this, in the, putting the calendar item together, we had a little bit of crosstalk about it, and Director Alfano corrected his, sent me a note about what he specifically wanted. I've included the note on your, I've actually emailed it to you all, and I've included it in front of you to, so he can explain what he wanted. I think we had a, like I say, crosstalk about it, whether it was a financial consultant or a management consultant, and it's clarified here. Before we go any further, Mr. Chair, I have one request from staff, is could you sign the checks before closed session?
Oops.
Please, thank you.
And when I read, you sent this out, I think late this afternoon.
That's right.
Hello.
We're listening.
When I read this, I was actually wondering why Director Alfano's request was limited to just admin.
It's not meant to be.
Let's have the topic introduced and
Yeah.
Mr. Manager.
Okay, at the last meeting, Director Alfano requested that the staff
I don't want to.
put an item on the calendar to authorize a request for proposal for a consultant. In emails that came out as financial consultant, it's been cleared up. Director Alfano has made it clear what his wishes were, so I'm bringing that item to the board to see if the board wants me to put forward an RFP for this consulting service.
So, do you want to explain what you're actually asking for?
Yeah, as I've mentioned before, I think it would really be helpful to us to understand basically what Sam does for a living. You all saw the 2 pages that the staff put together of all the costs that are outside of anybody who's a mechanic or a collections person or works on the plant, whether they're contractors, legal staff, accounting staff. I would like this firm to come in and look at focus on all of the non-operational costs. I don't want them to go stay on the mechanic all day and see how many wrenches he turns. I want them to focus on all the other parts of SAM where I truly think if a good analysis is done, I think there's areas we can find, we can do better, we can be more efficient, and we can possibly cut some costs. And there are firms, we're having one in the city right now, that's looking at all these facets within the city. Now, obviously, they're not touching, for example, they're not looking at the sheriff, that contract's a separate issue, they don't look at that. But everything within City Hall, they're looking at all those facets, and it's actually trying to break down what needs to be done, what is being done, how long does it take, how much are we paying for it, whether it's copiers, phones, whatever it is, then coming back to us, explaining what they've seen, and then giving us recommendations. They may say, for example, get a new phone system, get a phone system that rings directly to people and you can eliminate something. Get a different copier, go buy a copier, don't lease it, I have no idea. But these are the kind of recommendations that this firm would bring back to us, because they do other sewer agencies, they're familiar with what sewer agencies do for a living.
Do you have one in mind?
I've got a couple that the staff has come up with that they've checked,
Which staff?
Half Moon Bay. And we're more than willing to offer them up and see what you all think. But I definitely think we're gonna get some benefit from this in terms of improving how we run SAM.
So let me ask, go ahead, go Rick, no, go.
No, I was gonna, would we be able to get things like, here are your percents of revenue, and here's comparisons with 10 similar sewer agencies, so your percent is 10% for copiers, everybody else is 5% or 20%.
Right. What they're doing for the city is they're looking like, say, planning. They say, okay, you've got 13,000 people, you've got X permits a year, and your cost to run these permits are X. We've looked at other cities and gee, their permit costs are only Y, they're much lower, because here's how you do things and here's how they do things, and this is how you could improve, for example, how you do planning. So yeah, they'll do a comparison to other agencies to let us see how we stack up.
So to Rick's question, it's a benchmark question, right? So
Yeah.
I think if you put that in the RFP that you wanna see those things, I think you could probably get that.
But the reason.
Wait, Jim has something.
Well, I just wanna ask, do you have any, Ellen, do you have any, you've asked questions about how things are done, or you've asked questions about amounts. Do you have any, before we spend money like that, do you have any evidence that there's some problem, or do you have any, is there any indication that there's a problem with the administrative staff?
Well, let's not try and pinpoint where I think the exact issues are. I mean, I've done this kind of thing for a living in the past, looking at operations and trying to find ways to run them better and reduce cost. And I do think that it's worth spending the money to look at how we're doing things right now. And yes, my gut feeling is we'll be offered suggestions on how we can be more efficient and reduce our costs. Yes, I believe that.
Could you share what, when you do have some indication that there is a problem, can you share that with us?
Well, I think I've said in the past, I think administratively, I think we're spending more than I think we should have. And again, when you saw the 2-page report where you've got, well, let me give you a good example. In terms of contract negotiations, SAM currently pays a monthly retainer, right? And that's roughly a little under $1,000 a month.
Under 900.
Okay. Now, the way we do in the city is when we're ready to do a contract, we bring in a company, a firm, they lay out the contract, they negotiate it, the contract's done. They go away, we stop paying them. We only bring them in just to do the contract. We don't do a monthly retainer. I personally think that concept is more efficient than having somebody constantly, I guess, what was your last contract, 1.5 years, 2 years?
Sorry, what?
How long was the last contract?
It was never that short.
That's
No.
probably
No,
three.
when did we
probably
last
3
have a
years.
contract?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
So my assumption is you've been paying this labor firm monthly for 3 years.
Mhm.
and we don't have a contract. So, again, I'm suggesting here that it may be more efficient.
I just wanna caution, I don't wanna go any further down that road discussing anything about contract or no, in open session.
Good point. Yeah, well,
I don't know that we're gonna step into a closed session item, but I wanna caution that we don't.
Fair, I think that's a great point, and
Yeah,
I think
that's
as an example, if I can put a boundary on it, is, it's that we retain a service for contract negotiation and then leave it there.
Mhm.
And it's, so having, my perspective is, I'm not aware that we ever did a top to bottom review of operational efficiency. I think it'd be beneficial, I think we'll learn things we could benefit from. I know, there's a pretty clear pattern in Half Moon Bay, that we've done this a few times recently, and we learn something every time, and we're more efficient because we made some changes, now we do things. And I think that we can always decide whether or not we act on those changes, but I think it's worthwhile to get some third-party insight.
the reason that I had made my earlier comment about the scope, and I may or may not have mentioned this here before, it's probably a bit touchy, but, I asked, GSD's general manager, who actually runs 4 sewer plants at the south end of the state, what his average staffing level was. Now, I need to get more information from him because they have no admin staff. The admin is done back at his company's headquarters, so there's nobody at the plants doing any admin at all. But he runs 4 sewer plants, I think typically around half the size of this one. And the number of staff you need is not at all linear with the size of the plant. He runs 4 sewer plants with 1.5 FTE each. He's got a total of 6 employees for 4 plants. So that's why I was wondering if maybe we wanna do a deeper evaluation of the whole operation.
You really think?
I don't know, okay?
Oh,
I'm
no,
not a
come
sewer
on.
plant manager.
You've been in this particular job now for over a decade.
Yeah. 15
I,
years.
you keep bringing up the 1.5 FTE. You've been out in the plant, you've been out in the streets, you've been all around, you've approved at least 10 budgets.
Yeah.
We've gone through budget workshops year after year. We've had managers who've done zero-based budget analysis, assuming that we have no budget, no staff, figuring out what it would take to run this operation. It's one of the first things Jack did when he came in. Remember that?
Well,
I
that was
do.
11 years ago, so.
I remember
I
that.
don't really,
And
I'll take your word for it.
And honestly, any suggestion that 1.5 FTEs could run this place is just, it's so absurd, I just gotta call it absurd.
True.
And
Yeah.
so I'd ask that you consider how absurd it sounds. It doesn't support your argument at all, because we know each other really well. And I'm just calling BS on it. It's time to call BS on it and say, please, let's talk real here.
But that's why I wanna get some independent outside analysis.
I'm looking,
And maybe it'll support what we have.
I'm looking, we did look for a time at possibly outsourcing, Sam outright.
We did.
Oh, yeah, Cal-Am was actually, pushing that as a service, right?
Not recently.
Yeah, not recently, but, the inside joke is, yeah, he has some Cal-Am experience, but I mean, we looked at outsourcing, we actually looked at the numbers, and we have looked at, that zero-based budgeting and year over year. Are there things that we could improve our efficiency on? Are there new technologies that we can go after that could do a better job for us? Yeah. But are we looking, and I'll just raise it again, every time that we're talking about, let's get in there and start cutting on the budget, I wanna know what the point is. There's a lot of things that we do that we could have a much smaller budget if we just stopped doing them, but we do have a charter, we do have a mission. And if something is not conformant to that mission, we shouldn't be doing it. But if it's part of the mission, then our goal is to do it efficiently. And rather than some wild speculation, especially speculation that's gonna cost some serious money, I'd kinda like to have a reason to do it before we do something disruptive and expensive. If there's something supporting that, fine, but let's talk about that. I don't wanna talk about the thing, I wanna talk about the reason for the thing, and right now I'm not hearing it.
Okay, I'll, drop for, the time being, my suggestion, and what I'd like to ask Director Alfano is, for a cost estimate, on what the, what this review might cost the agency.
Alex, the city checked with some agencies, or some consulting firms, and it's somewhere roughly in the range of $20,000 to $30,000 for a thorough review.
Sounds kinda high to me.
I'm not sure you're gonna be able to get a really thorough quality review by a really first-class agency for much less than, I'm gonna say 20,000. But again, until we do the RFP, we're not gonna know. We're not committed until we get the results from the RFP. So let me help with this. I understand your concern. What I would suggest is, let's do the RFP. Let's see what these firms come back with. Let's see what their suggestions are. And then we can make the decision of whether to go forward or not, because the costs aren't really gonna, we're not gonna have cost until we've.
What's the impact on staff?
You mean for providing information to the consultant?
What's the impact on staff?
To do what? To do the RFP?
What's the impact on staff were this kind of thing to go forward? It's not gonna be free to staff in terms of their time and what they're doing and,
No.
and what kind of work they're gonna be asked to do
No.
in response to this. I mean, we've gone through some similar reviews in addressing questions from the EPA and the regional board. Horribly expensive. I remember that. I remember the work that Tony and
Jack.
Jeanette and Jack and we at the member agencies all did to deal with that, and there was a lot of questions about how we operate, what we did, what our policies were, when we spent it, when we did the maintenance, all those kind of things. The goal there was to find out whether or not we were doing our job. It would require, honestly, to provide an understanding of a lot of things about how we do our job and whether or not there's a more efficient way to do it, something similar. And that's, I know I've gone in and I've evaluated networks for enterprises. And as much as I've tried to have a light touch on it, it was never free to them either in terms of, the interaction time that I required from their network and IT staffs. So, I mean, what's the cost to our folks for doing this kind of thing?
Is there, let me ask the manager this, is there anything, actually, maybe I need to direct this at the staff who were here and involved with it. Is there anything in writing from the EPA review that Director Boyd referenced, that a consultant could look at to minimize how much current staff time they take up?
There was a report, I'm not sure how helpful it would be.
Who's got the operational oversight responsibility for this agency, right?
General manager.
No, it's actually this board.
Okay.
And certainly the general manager bears the responsibility of the, yes, you're right, but buck stops here, actually. And
True.
I don't know about you, I read that EPA report. And
Didn't. Maybe I should.
maybe you should.
Can I get a copy?
Maybe everybody should. I think it might be a great idea.
If you could put it up and send us a link.
I don't have the kind of lack of certainty about how and why the agency operates that would motivate me to support spending $20,000 to $30,000 for basically a speculative ROI.
I mean,
Can we at least get an RFP with no commitment? Are you willing to do that?
if I may, through the chair. So, while I don't do this kind of thing for sewer authorities or government agencies, in my professional life, I do this sort of thing for businesses all the time. And your question about how much staff time involved always comes up. Because we always, you know, it is either, like Rick suggested, there could be benchmarking questions. How are we doing compared to other agencies of similar size? How are we doing, you know, I might face things like, what are our travel and entertainment expenses compared to other corporations our size? You know, and benchmarking. Other things that we look at are, we talk to staff, and we want to understand, what is it that causes you, what is difficult? And what are your pain points? What's hard about your job? And so we look for opportunities to make things more efficient, because we make some software, some technology, some process. We might find redundancies. So we look for those kinds of things, and that takes staff input. And then there's, you know, expertise that I might have, and I expect this to be very parallel, expertise that I might have about new processes to follow, or ways to be more efficient, or, and so all that sort of analysis and that sort of review. It could be a light touch, could be a heavy touch. That's really up to the client, which would be Sam, which would be us, to dictate. I would support getting input from a third party about, are there ways, to answer the question, are there ways we could be more efficient? Are there ways we could operate more smoothly? How do we benchmark against other similar sized agencies in a number of areas that we define? I think that's a healthy thing to ask periodically. I think in the business world, the corporate world, I think the cycles every 3 to 5 years that you see when they come through. Are we doing things the right way? I think it's healthy to ask, are we doing things the right way? Or is doing things the way we've been doing them fine? And the answer might be, yep. The answer might be, you know what, there are some things we can learn and grow from, and get some other input and other comparisons I think would be valuable. So I think it is, I would consider that smart or thoughtful management of the agency to ask those questions and get that input, and so I would support that.
I'd like to ask a question. You know, Steve, it's your job to run the agency and to run it efficiently and to do the best job that you can. And I'd just like to ask you, do you think that the agency is running efficiently and smoothly? Do you think it's worth $20,000 or $30,000 to evaluate this? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, one of the things one does in taking over an organization is make those kinds of calculations and look at things. One of the things I've learned, especially in small unit utilities, where the roles of different workers blend together, and tracking things doesn't match up with bigger organizations. And part of what ends up happening, I think, I've made the point that one of the things I managed to do is not screw things up. Sometimes coming in with better systems doesn't work, and especially in small systems like this, where people have been together in small units. To say that we couldn't use looking outside, we're constantly looking outside for better ideas. You know, would I object to it? No, but in terms of cost and time and staff time, I'd be concerned about that. I think that we can always improve, but I think it's something that I'll be honest, my focus is always on effectiveness. Efficiency is the second outcome. Effectiveness. We're in a business where no failure is really what's expected, and to become efficient, you often drive the operation to the point. I worked for a utility a water utility, where 5% of total bacteria counts in the system was an acceptable standard. They would operate at 1.5 to 2% positive coliforms, where my standard was 0, and it was a cost issue, and it was I was focused on effectiveness, and they were focused on cost, and did it make any difference? you know, I think it did. I wouldn't wanna operate that way, but could I get advice from the people? You know, I know all of us spend time looking at how other people do things, and we try and learn from that. An organized group coming in, looking at this, I don't know how you could do it for 20 or 30,000, and, you know, to be fair, maybe to the chair's point, you know, the big cost ticket items here aren't administration. Big cost ticket items are, you know, the capital and the operation, that's where the real money is. So, you know, if I look for a first place, I don't know that I would look first at the administration. I think I would look at the bigger cost centers. But, you know, we will do for the board what they want, and I don't think, you know, I think one of the outcomes could be is that we might be a little too lean, which is a possible outcome, and I'm sure the staff would be happy with that. So, you know, if the board chooses to do it, we'll implement it, do a good job of it.
I think that's a fine outcome, by the way, if I may. If the study came back and said, you know what, this is not balanced and you're too lean, and you need to rebalance resources and add a resource or add something here or there, I wanna know that. I think that's good information that we can act on.
But is that,
Positive, you know, either go up or down.
If I might, when I first joined the SAM board, we had 19 staff, with crew and administration. And, the board working with the general manager, or the manager at the time, reduced staff, and we did get too lean. And then we identified we had a pretty serious risk in collections, that we didn't have enough experience, or enough hands in collection to develop the experience for what was then kind of a speculative, obvious retirement coming up sooner or later. And we've recently experienced that retirement. And so at that point, we decided we were too lean, and we instructed the manager to go hire one or two more, and we've done that. So those kind of adjustments have happened both directions in the past decade on this, at this agency. So I'm all for it, and we've done it. So I'm $30,000. I'm concerned about that, and to be excited about $30,000, I mean, there's gotta be some kind of, I know the case that I made for my customers to say, hey, let me come evaluate your network. And, you know, I made a case for them that showed we will save you money on doing this. It's gonna be well worth the effort that you put into it. It had to be a value-add proposition, and it was a case that I made all the time. I take it you do as well. I'm not hearing the value-add proposition here. I'm hearing speculative generalities, and that's all well and good. I'm supportive of those generalities, but I'm not gonna act in support with a vote when we don't have any kind of ROI.
I think that comes out of the work, and we may get some good case examples from an RFP response, but I mean, that, I kinda said where I stand, I'm not gonna.
We're a small agency.
Yeah, that's right. But, I mean, that's stated where I stand, but, I think we get examples from an RFP. RFP is, at which point we decide whether we execute it or not, and, I don't wanna repeat myself, that's all I have.
Yeah, with an RFP, and I guess I've seen different ones, and like Scott, I do implementations, which is the same ROI kind of thing, but we indicate in ours very specifically what our consultant time is and what your staff time is. Would that be just a standard part of an RFP, which would be, we will need access to Tony, 15 hours, Jeanette 5 hours, Susie 2 hours? Would that be part of the RFP to know? I think a lot of people are concerned here about staff time. Could be the same price as the RFP. So it would be nice to see, if we go forward with an RFP, to see what that effect would be, because that could double the cost. It could be very minimal. Maybe they just want to come in and look at financial, just give them 10 years of financial statements, and they'll run them through a spreadsheet and say, here's how you compare.
I think you can ask that question it's an RFP question, right, which is.
Yeah, as part of the RFP,
how would-
if we go, I'd like to at least see that.
I think that's a
What
fair
the
question to
impact
ask.
is.
And what's your, what staff involvement would you typically expect and what's been, you can also ask for example of what you've done in the past, so you get, how they handle it.
And we would probably want, obviously you ask for references and stuff like that, we call an agency and say, hey, how much time did it take?
So
I wanna know that at an absolute minimum.
So I would support, you know, asking, doing the RFP process, with the understanding that depending on what we see in it, notably the price tag, that there's probably gonna be some serious resistance to going forward with it, but I'd certainly like to see, proposals for us to think about. And the proposals would have to, pretty well detail, how much staff time from each of the staff positions might be required. Yeah.
So what do we have here? We have a full-time general manager, we have a full-time administrative manager, and we have, what's your,
Receptionist.
what?
Receptionist.
Receptionist, is that,
Susie.
yeah.
And we
full-time.
have a tech
So we have
services
three,
supervisor, he's an admin as well.
right, so we have three office people.
Basically,
Four.
four
There's
of the
four
five
of
at
us.
the table here.
Yeah, we have three office people, and Tony works, goes both ways, outside.
Well, we in
Try to rephrase
we in
that.
admin
I'll
work
make
for
that into
all
record.
departments.
I'll rephrase that.
Well, we in admin work for all departments at SAM. We work for treatment, non-domestic waste, source
Right.
control, collections.
Okay, so
We
wait,
handle all aspects
so
of every department.
but Tony, are you in the office all the time, or are you outside?
Much of, I do both, but mostly in the office,
Is the-
working
You do
on the
both?
stuff that's going on outside.
Right,
Yeah,
because
for the most part.
so we have three people in the office, for $30,000, if it's $30,000, it's $10,000 a person for office administration. And then the time for them, I don't see a big hole, I don't see a reason, I don't see a problem for spending $30,000 for this small agency at this point.
Well, Jim,
I don't see.
you remember the two-page write-up we got? So you had more than just staff, you had all the outside people that work for SAM that are non-operational, right? And I don't remember if I added it up, but I'm guessing it was somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million by the time you're done with staff, legal, accounting, auditing, labor. The one software company was $120,000 a year, I think, all by itself.
Well, we're already taking steps. We're looking at the legal aspect.
Right, that's actually the very kind of thing that Jim, I think, was asking for earlier about what kind of things are you hoping to tackle?
Well, that was part of the reason I asked for that write-up of who do we pay outside of the mechanics and the collection people on Sam's payroll, and it was a significant amount. And I'm guessing it was probably somewhere well north of 500,000. My only point is, if we spread this out to the three agencies, worst case, it's like, we pick up 15, the two agencies pick up 7,500 each. I mean, it's not a huge financial burden for any one agency. But I agree, I think we should do the RFP, we should see what these agencies say to us, what are their projections for staff time, and what do they see as what kind of an outcome. But I don't think you can take the stance that we don't see any problems, we think we're fine, we know what goes on, we're here every day from 8 to 5, so we know exactly how SAM runs. I'm not. I can't tell you exactly what we do every day. And I think it's, as directors, we have a fiduciary responsibility to periodically, and as Rick said, maybe every 3 or 5 years, you bring in somebody and take a look at how you're doing, see if there's ways you can improve. I don't think it's money that would be ill spent, but again, let's start the process, let's get the RFP going, and let's just see what the costs are, and what the outcomes could be. That can't hurt us.
So like I already said, I'm willing to issue the RFP, as long as you recognize that I'm probably, depending on the price tag, I'm probably gonna have, serious resistance to.
I'll make, that's a separate determination, I have to make that as well. May I suggest you wanna pause until Jim returns? I think this is,
He had
an urgent thing, right?
yeah, he had to,
Okay, so,
he had a seriously important phone
Okay.
call to deal
What
with. He
you
said
want-
he'd be back in 5
may I
minutes.
suggest that we
just recess for fun?
we recess for 5 minutes? I think that, I
Okay.
just, I think that would be prudent, cause I don't wanna, if we advance the discussion and we're all singing kumbaya, then we have to backtrack to get Jim to sing kumbaya as well.
He's got a good singing voice,
Oh,
and
baritone.
he's a
plays the
musician.
He plays the man.
All right,
Yeah.
it's 8:30.